I've always been the type to prioritize stability over drama. I guess that's why I married Sophia. She had this spark, this whirlwind energy that drew me in. Opposites attract, right? At least, that's what I used to believe. For the longest time, I thought we balanced each other out. Her spontaneity kept life interesting, and my practicality kept things grounded. But life has a funny way of showing you just how wrong you can be. Sophia inherited the apartment from her grandmother a few years back. It wasn't much to look at: peeling wallpaper, creaky floors, and a kitchen straight out of the 70s. But the location was perfect, just a short commute to work for both of us, and Sophia swore she loved the place. At first, I didn't mind the dated decor or the occasional plumbing issue. It felt like a project, something we could work on together. It's funny how naive I was about the word together. After a year of putting up with dripping faucets and windows that didn't quite close all the way, I brought up the idea of renovating. Sophia was hesitant at first, claiming she liked the character of the apartment, but eventually, she came around. "You know what?" she said one evening, waving a glass of wine in her hand. "Let's make this place shine." I remember feeling a surge of excitement. Finally, something we could collaborate on, something that would bring us closer. Except, as it turned out, we quickly became me. The planning? That was all me. The budgeting? Me again. The weekends spent sanding floors and patching walls while Sophia went out for self-care spa days? You guessed it, me. I didn't mind, though. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Every brushstroke, every screw tightened, every piece of furniture assembled. It was all for us. For the life we were building together. I worked long hours during the week, but every evening, I'd come home, change into my paint-splattered clothes, and get to work. It was exhausting, but also oddly fulfilling. The apartment started to transform, piece by piece. The hideous green carpet in the living room was replaced with sleek hardwood floors. The faded wallpaper came down, revealing smooth, freshly painted walls and soft, calming tones. I even managed to install new light fixtures, a feat I was particularly proud of, considering my lack of experience with electrical work. Sophia would occasionally pop in to supervise, usually with a glass of wine in hand. "Looks great, honey," she'd say with a quick glance before disappearing again. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too focused on the vision I had for the apartment. By the time I was done, the place barely resembled the rundown unit we had started with. It was warm, modern, and inviting. A real home. Our home. Or so I thought. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. The way Sophia started spending more time out of the house. The vague excuses about catching up with friends or networking events. The way her tone shifted whenever we talked about the apartment, as if it wasn't ours but something she owned outright. I brushed it all off. I was too busy fixing things to notice that something was breaking between us. But that moment when I finally stepped back and looked at the finished apartment, I'll never forget it. It was one of the rare times I allowed myself to feel proud of something I'd done. I thought it was a gift for both of us, a place where we could build a future together. I thought it was a testament to our partnership, to everything we'd worked for. I couldn't have been more wrong. Turns out, while I was busy renovating walls, Sophia was renovating plans of her own. Plans that didn't include me in the picture. The night the renovations were finally complete, I felt like I had crossed the finish line of a marathon. Every corner of the apartment reflected months of hard work, sweat, and patience. The floors gleamed, the walls were pristine, and the furniture I had carefully picked out tied everything together. For the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to relax. It was a moment of quiet pride, the kind of satisfaction that comes from creating something beautiful with your own hands. Sophia came home that evening, balancing a shopping bag in one hand and her phone in the other. She walked in, looked around, and gave a nonchalant, "It looks nice. Just nice." That was it. No acknowledgement of the late nights, the weekends sacrificed, or the money I had poured into making this place a home. I chalked it up to her being tired and didn't press her for more. But her reaction lingered in the back of my mind like a splinter. A few days later, she brought up the apartment during dinner. "You know," she began, twirling her fork in her pasta, "the renovations really boosted the value of this place." I nodded. glad she was finally noticing. Yeah, it's like a brand new apartment. She gave me this look, part calculating and part amused, before dropping the bombshell. I've been thinking, with how much nicer it is now, it's only fair to adjust the rent. At first, I thought I misheard her. Adjust the rent? I repeated, trying to make sense of her words. Yes. I mean, the apartment is mine, after all. And you've made it so much better. I was thinking it's only fair to reflect that improvement in the rent you're paying. I stared at her, stunned. You're joking, right? I just spent months renovating this place. For us? Why would I pay more for something I fixed with my own money? She shrugged, as if it was the most reasonable thing in the world. You know how it is, Mark. Property values increase with upgrades. It's just business. Business. That word echoed in my head, hollow and cold. Business? Wasn't this supposed to be our home? A place we shared, where every decision was made together. I couldn't wrap my head around it. She was treating me like a tenant, not a partner. Still, I tried to reason with her. Sophia, I didn't do all this work so you could charge me more. I did it because I thought this was our home. Yours and mine. She didn't even flinch. It is our home, but I own it, and I think this is fair. Besides, with the raise you got at work, you can afford it. That was the moment something shifted in me. It wasn't just the money. It was the principle. The way she dismissed everything I had done, reducing it to a transaction. I realized then that Sophia didn't see me as her husband, at least not in the way I saw her as my wife. To her, I was just a convenience, someone to lean on when it suited her. And now, I was an opportunity to squeeze more profit out of a situation she hadn't even contributed to. I tried to keep calm, but the hurt was bubbling under the surface. How much are we talking about here? I asked, hoping she'd say something minor, something I could overlook for the sake of peace. Her answer made my jaw drop. Triple the rent, she said casually, like she was asking me to pass the salt. Triple. Not a slight increase, not a fair adjustment. 3 times what I was already paying. I couldn't believe it. Sophia, that's insane. You know I can't afford that. She smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind of smile you give when you know you've already won. Then maybe you should start looking for another place. Those words hit me like a punch to the gut. I realized in that moment that this wasn't just about money. She didn't want me here anymore. She was pushing me out, and she didn't even have the decency to be honest about it. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. How could the woman I married, the woman I loved, treat me like this? I didn't argue. There was no point. Instead, I sat there in silence, letting her words sink in. This wasn't a fight I could win. It wasn't even a fight worth having. Sophia had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. I could either stay and let her exploit me, or I could leave and start over. And for the first time in a long while, the choice was crystal clear. When Sophia made it clear that she expected me to either pay triple the rent or move out, I didn't react immediately. What could I say? I wasn't going to beg to stay in a place that I had spent months renovating with my own money. I wasn't going to try to reason with someone who saw me as little more than a tenant instead of a husband. So, I kept my response simple. All right, I'll start looking. She didn't even flinch. No surprise, no regret, not even a hint of hesitation. It was like she had been waiting for me to say those words. Her lack of reaction told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't an emotional decision for her. It was cold, calculated, and, honestly, humiliating. That night, I sat on the edge of the bed we once shared, scrolling through apartment listings on my phone. I wasn't looking for something fancy. I just needed a place that was mine. Something small, quiet, and close to work. It didn't take long to find it. A 1-bedroom apartment just a few blocks from my office. The rent was higher than what I had been paying Sophia, but after her ridiculous demand, it felt like a bargain. The next morning, I made a few calls. By noon, I had toured the place and signed the lease. The landlord, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Mrs. Allen, didn't bat an eye when I asked if I could move in immediately. As long as the deposit clears, it's yours, she said. I liked her straightforwardness. It was a nice change from the manipulative games I'd been dealing with. With the lease signed, I called a moving company that specialized in same-day moves. It cost a little extra, but I didn't care. I wanted to be out of Sophia's apartment as quickly as possible. As I waited for the movers to arrive, I walked through the apartment, no, her apartment, with a roll of sticky notes in hand. I marked everything that was mine, everything I had paid for or built with my own two hands. The dining table and chairs? Mine. The couch? Mine. The coffee maker I had splurged on after my promotion? Definitely mine. Even the bookshelves I had painstakingly installed were coming with me. By the time the movers arrived, the apartment looked like a scene out of a crime show. Bright yellow sticky notes everywhere, like evidence markers at a crime scene. I could imagine Sophia's reaction when she saw the place stripped of everything but the basics. But honestly, I didn't care. The movers were efficient, packing up my belongings with care and loading them onto the truck in record time. I directed them like a conductor, ensuring that every piece of furniture, every appliance, and every knickknack I had bought was accounted for. By the time they were done, the apartment was almost unrecognizable. The floors I had polished gleamed under the bare light bulbs, the walls I had painted stood empty, and the only thing left in the living room was that ancient sofa Sophia had insisted on keeping. It was almost poetic in a way. The apartment looked exactly as it had the day I first walked in, before I poured my heart and soul into transforming it. It was a stark reminder that all the work I had done, all the effort I had put in, meant nothing to Sophia. As the movers finished loading the truck, I took one last look around. This was supposed to be our home, a place we built together. But now, it was just a shell, a reminder of a partnership that had never truly existed. I left the keys on the kitchen counter, locked the door behind me, and didn't look back. By the time the sun set, I was in my new apartment, unpacking boxes and arranging furniture. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't completely finished, but it was mine. And for the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. No tension, no resentment, no games. Just quiet, simple solitude. Sophia probably expected me to fight her, to plead my case or beg for another chance. Instead, I left her exactly what she had asked for, her apartment. And as far as I was concerned, she could keep it. I was done. Done with the manipulation, the entitlement, and the constant feeling of never being enough. The next chapter of my life had begun, and I wasn't going to let her, or anyone else, hold me back. It didn't take long for me to hear the news. In fact, it came sooner than I expected, just 3 days after I moved out. A mutual friend of ours, Chris, called me, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You're not going to believe this," he started, a hint of hesitation in his tone. Sophia's new tenants moved into the apartment. Tenants? I repeated, confused. She didn't mention renting it out. Chris paused, clearly uncomfortable. "It's not tenants. It's Alex." Now, if you're wondering who Alex is, let me save you the trouble. Alex was Sophia's friend. The one she insisted was just a friend despite the way she lit up when he walked into her room, or how she always seemed to find an excuse to bring him up in conversation. I'd noticed the signs, but I'd buried the suspicion deep, convincing myself I was being paranoid. Turns out, I wasn't paranoid at all. "What do you mean, Alex?" I asked, my voice tight. "I mean, Alex and his family moved into the apartment," Chris replied, his words hitting like a sledgehammer. "His parents, his sister, the whole lot of them. They're living there now." I let out a sharp laugh. Not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe the audacity. Here I was, breaking my back to make that apartment livable, and now Alex, the so-called friend, and his entire family were reaping the benefits. It was almost comical how blatant the betrayal was. "Guess that explains why she wanted me out," I said bitterly, more to myself than to Chris. "Man, I don't even know what to say," Chris replied awkwardly. "It's messed up. You put so much into that place." Messed up didn't even begin to cover it. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I wasn't just hurt by Sophia's betrayal. I was disgusted by how calculated it all was. She had waited until the renovations were done, until I had poured every ounce of effort and money into making that apartment perfect, and then she had the gall to demand triple the rent to force me out. Also, she could hand it over to Alex and his family on a silver platter. The thing is, I wasn't just angry at her. I was angry at myself. Angry for not seeing it sooner. Angry for ignoring the red flags. Angry for believing, even for a moment, that she valued our relationship as much as I did. But here's the funny thing about betrayal. Once you've been burned, it has a way of clarifying things. My anger, while intense, was fleeting. It didn't take long for me to realize that Sophia had done me a favor. Sure, the betrayal stung, but in leaving, I had freed myself from a toxic relationship that had been slowly suffocating me. Alex and his family could have the apartment. They could enjoy the freshly painted walls, the polished floors, and the upgraded kitchen. None of it mattered to me anymore. It wasn't my problem. It wasn't my life. That night, as I sat in my new apartment, surrounded by the furniture and appliances I had worked so hard to buy, I felt an odd sense of relief. Sophia had shown her true colors, and while it hurt, it also gave me the closure I didn't know I needed. I was free to move on, free to build a life that wasn't tied to someone who saw me as disposable. Of course, I knew the situation with Alex and his family wasn't going to end well. Sophia might have thought she was playing a winning hand, but life has a funny way of evening the score. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to confront her or make a scene. All I had to do was sit back and wait. People like Sophia and Alex always end up digging their own graves. And if they didn't, well, that was fine too. Because for the first time in a long time, I was putting myself first. I had a new apartment, a new beginning, and a newfound sense of clarity. And no matter what happened next, one thing was certain. I wasn't looking back. It had been a little over a month since I walked away from that apartment and everything tied to it. My new place was coming together nicely, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. No tension, no emotional manipulation, no unwelcome surprises. Just me, my space, and the freedom to live life on my terms. So, when my phone rang one morning and Sophia's name popped up on the screen, my first instinct was to ignore it. But curiosity got the better of me. I answered, bracing myself for whatever nonsense she was about to throw my way. "Mark," she said, skipping the pleasantries entirely. Her tone was sharp, accusatory. "Why hasn't the rent been paid?" I blinked, caught off guard by the question. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she snapped. "The rent for the apartment is overdue. Why haven't you paid it?" I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Here she was, the woman who had pushed me out of the apartment, demanding to know why I wasn't paying rent for a place I no longer lived in. A place her lover and his family now occupied, no less. "Sophia," I began, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "I don't think you understand how this works. I don't live there anymore. I'm not paying rent for an apartment I don't live in. That's not my responsibility." She let out an exasperated sigh, as if I were a child refusing to do his chores. "Mark, it's your fault we're in this mess. You left so suddenly, and now Alex is struggling to keep up with the payments. You need to step up and help." There it was. The real reason for her call. Alex, her lover, the man she had orchestrated this whole scheme for, couldn't afford the apartment, and now she was scrambling to clean up the mess she'd created. I couldn't help but smile as I replied, "Sophia, let me get this straight. You pushed me out of the apartment, demanded triple the rent, and gave the place to Alex and his family. And now you expect me to cover for them because they can't handle it? Do I have that right?" "You're being selfish," she shot back, her voice rising. "This is about family. About doing the right thing. Family." That word hit a nerve. "Sophia," I said, my tone turning cold, "don't you dare talk to me about family. Family doesn't manipulate you. Family doesn't take everything you've worked for and throw it in your face. And family sure as hell doesn't demand you pay for their mistakes." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost picture her standing there, her face flushed with anger, trying to come up with some excuse or justification. "Look," she said finally, her voice softer but no less condescending, "I know things didn't end well between us, but this isn't just about me. It's about everyone involved. You're in a better position than Alex right now. It's the least you can do." I laughed, a bitter sound that seemed to catch her off guard. "The least I can do? Sophia, the least I can do is exactly what I'm doing right now. Nothing. I don't owe you, Alex, or anyone else a damn thing. I've moved on. Maybe you should try doing the same." Her voice hardened again. "I can't believe how petty you're being." "Petty?" I repeated, my patience finally wearing thin. "You know what's petty, Sophia? Kicking me out of the apartment I spent months renovating, so you could move in your lover and his family. You made your bed, literally. Now you can lie in it." Before she could respond, I ended the call. I stared at my phone for a moment, half expecting it to start buzzing again with another round of accusations and guilt tripping. But it didn't. Instead, I blocked her number, just like I'd blocked Alex's and her family's weeks ago. For good measure, I blocked her on social media too. I was done. Done with the drama, the manipulation, and the endless cycle of giving while they took. As I sat back and sipped my coffee, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Sophia could figure out her problems on her own. I had my own life to live, and for the first time in a long time, I was determined to live it on my terms. I should have expected the flood of messages and calls, but somehow, it still caught me off guard. The day after Sophia's call, my phone started buzzing non-stop. Calls, texts, emails, even messages on social media. I'd blocked her number, but she must have borrowed Alex's phone or used another line. And when that didn't work, Alex himself decided to get involved. The first message I saw was from an unknown number. "You selfish bastard," it read. "You left us in this mess, and now you won't even help? Pathetic." I didn't need a signature to know it was Alex. His writing style, if you could call it that, was about as charming as he was in person. Then came the text from Sophia. Long, rambling paragraphs about family responsibilities and how I was ruining their lives. She painted herself as the victim, as if I had been the one to betray her, as if I had forced her to push me out of the apartment. "You need to think about what's fair," one message said. "You used the apartment for years and didn't pay enough. It's only right you help now." Fair? The word nearly made me laugh out loud. What was fair about what she had done? What was fair about taking everything I had built and tossing it aside for someone else? But I wasn't about to argue with her. I had already said my piece. Then came Alex's messages, short, crude, and dripping with entitlement. "You're nothing but a coward," one read. Another said, "You've always been jealous of me. That's why you can't stand seeing us happy." Happy? If they were so happy, why were they hounding me for money? The texts kept coming, each one more ridiculous than the last. Sophia tried guilt, Alex tried threats, and eventually, they both tried outright insults. "You're a selfish, petty man," Sophia wrote. "I don't know how I ever put up with you." Alex, not to be outdone, chimed in with, "You're nothing but a loser who hides behind your job. No wonder she chose me." I read each message once, then deleted it. Responding would only fuel their fire, and I had no interest in wasting my time or energy on people who clearly didn't deserve it. Blocking their numbers only worked temporarily. They seemed determined to find new ways to reach me. But the more they tried, the less I cared. Their desperation was almost amusing. What they didn't realize, or refuse to admit, was that they were the architects of their own misery. They had made their choices, and now they were dealing with the consequences. I wasn't going to bail them out, no matter how many insults or guilt trips they threw my way. At one point, I got a message from Sophia's sister, Maria. She and I had always been cordial, though never particularly close. "Hey, Mark," her message began. "Sophia's really struggling right now. I know things didn't end well between you two, but maybe you could find it in your heart to help her out. She's still your family." Family. That word again. I stared at Maria's message for a long moment before replying with a single sentence. "Family doesn't treat each other the way she treated me." I didn't hear back from Maria after that. Over the next few weeks, the messages and calls slowly tapered off. Maybe they realized I wasn't going to budge. Maybe they just found someone else to pester. Either way, I was relieved to finally have some peace. Every now and then, I'd hear bits and pieces about them through mutual friends. Apparently, Alex's family was struggling to keep up with the rent, and tensions were high. Sophia had tried to negotiate a lower rent with the landlord, but her demands were swiftly denied. And Alex? His so-called business ventures were falling apart, leaving him with little more than empty promises and mounting debt. It wasn't exactly satisfying to hear about their struggles. If anything, It just reinforced how toxic the situation had been. But it was a reminder that I had made the right decision by walking away. Their problems were no longer my problems, and for that, I was grateful. In the end, I realized something important. Their anger, their desperation, their attempts to pull me back into their mess, it all stemmed from the same place. They weren't upset because I had wronged them. They were upset because I refused to let them control me anymore. And that, more than anything, was proof that I had finally taken my life back. After weeks of relentless messages and calls, the silence that followed was a welcome change. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could focus on my own life without the constant shadow of Sophia and Alex looming over me. The peace was almost unnerving at first, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized something. The quiet wasn't a pause before chaos. It was the beginning of something new. My new apartment was modest, but it felt like a mansion compared to what I'd endured. Everything in it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every appliance, every decoration. I didn't have to worry about someone else's approval or demands. I could rearrange the furniture at midnight if I wanted to, paint the walls neon green, or leave the dishes in the sink for days. Not that I did any of those things, but the freedom to do so was intoxicating. My mornings started with coffee brewed in the machine I'd brought from the old apartment, the one Sophia had scoffed at for being too basic. I'd sip it by the window, looking out at the city skyline, and remind myself how far I'd come. No more walking on eggshells, no more endless compromises that only benefited the other person. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. Work became a sanctuary. Without the stress of Sophia's manipulations weighing on me, I threw myself into my job with renewed focus. My boss even commented on the change. "You seem sharper lately," he said during a meeting. "Whatever you're doing, keep it up." I didn't tell him the secret was leaving a toxic situation behind, but I did take his compliment to heart. Outside of work, I started reconnecting with old hobbies, things I hadn't had time or energy for while I was busy renovating Sophia's apartment. I signed up for a photography class, something I'd always been curious about but never pursued. I began cooking for myself again, experimenting with recipes I'd bookmarked years ago. And for the first time in a long time, I started making plans for the future. Not just vague ideas, but real, actionable goals. The funny thing about starting over is that it's both terrifying and exhilarating. There were moments when I'd second-guess myself, wondering if I'd made the right choices. But those moments never lasted long. Every time doubt crept in, I'd remind myself of the person I used to be before Sophia's manipulations took their toll. That person wasn't afraid to take risks or stand up for himself. That person had dreams and ambitions that didn't revolve around someone else's needs. It wasn't just about moving into a new apartment. It was about reclaiming my life. Every step I took away from Sophia and her chaos felt like a step toward the version of myself I'd almost forgotten existed. One evening, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. There were pictures of the apartment before and after the renovation, snapshots of furniture I'd painstakingly picked out, even a few selfies of me covered in paint. At first, I felt a pang of regret, thinking about all the time and effort I'd wasted. But then I realized something. Those photos weren't just reminders of what I'd lost. They were proof of what I was capable of. I had transformed that apartment from a rundown mess into a beautiful space. And now, I was doing the same with my life. As the weeks turned into months, I started to notice something else. I was happier. Not the forced, surface-level happiness I'd felt in my old life, but a deeper, more genuine sense of contentment. I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Sophia and Alex were no longer a part of my daily thoughts. Their drama, their accusations, their manipulations, all of it faded into the background. I didn't need revenge or validation. Their struggles were their own, and I had no interest in getting involved. My new beginning wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It wasn't about making Sophia regret her decisions or showing Alex what he'd stolen from me. It was about building a life that was mine and mine alone. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. It was inevitable, really. People like Sophia and Alex always have a way of writing their own tragedies, and when I heard about what was happening with them, I wasn't the least bit surprised. I didn't go out of my way to find out. It wasn't like I was keeping tabs on them. But mutual friends and acquaintances have a way of filling in the gaps, whether you ask them to or not. The first tidbit came from Chris, the same friend who had broken the news about Alex moving in. He called me one afternoon, his voice heavy with barely concealed amusement. "You won't believe this," he started, a grin evident in his tone. "Sophia's apartment, well, your apartment, is falling apart." "Falling apart?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Didn't take long." "Yeah," Chris said, clearly relishing the gossip. "Alex and his family aren't exactly handy. I guess a pipe burst in the bathroom last week, and instead of fixing it, they just shut off the water and hoped it would go away. Now there's water damage all over the floor." I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it. After all the work I'd done to bring that apartment back to life, it was almost poetic that their negligence was undoing it. But Chris wasn't done. "And get this," he added, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "They're behind on the rent." That part didn't surprise me at all. Alex had always been more talk than action, a self-proclaimed entrepreneur with more failed ventures than successes. I'd bet good money that he'd moved into the apartment with no real plan for how to afford it. "Sounds like a real mess," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Chris laughed. "You're handling this better than I thought you would." I shrugged, even though he couldn't see it. Not my circus, not my monkeys. But the updates kept coming. A few weeks later, I ran into Maria, Sophia's sister, while grabbing coffee. Maria had always been nice enough, though she'd made it clear she didn't want to take sides when everything went down. Still, she couldn't resist sharing a little news. "Mark," she said, hesitating slightly, "I thought you should know. Sophia's having a tough time." "Oh," I replied, keeping my expression neutral. "She and Alex," Maria trailed off, as if searching for the right words. "Well, things aren't going great. He's trying to get a new business off the ground, but it's not working out. And with the rent on the apartment, plus the damage from the pipe, it's a lot." I nodded, saying nothing. I wasn't about to offer sympathy for a situation they had created themselves. Maria sighed, leaning closer as if she were about to confess something. "Honestly, I think she regrets how things turned out. She doesn't say it, but you can tell. She thought Alex would make her life easier, but," she shrugged, letting the sentence hang. I didn't know what to say, so I just gave a polite nod and sipped my coffee. It wasn't my place to dissect Sophia's regrets or lack thereof. She'd made her bed, and now she was lying in it. The last update came from Rachel, a distant cousin of mine who always seemed to have her finger on the pulse of family drama. She called me out of the blue, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. "You're not going to believe this," she said, diving straight into the gossip. "Sophia and Alex are getting evicted." "Evicted?" I repeated, more curious than surprised. "Yep," Rachel confirmed. "Apparently, they haven't paid rent in months, and the landlord finally had enough. They're being kicked out next week." I felt a strange mix of emotions hearing that. Part of me thought it was fitting, given everything they'd done. But another part of me, maybe the part that still remembered the person Sophia used to be, felt a twinge of sadness. No matter how toxic things had become, I never wanted to see her end up like this. "Wow," I said finally. "That's something." Rachel chuckled. "You're handling this way better than most people would." "Trust me," I replied, "it's not my problem anymore." And it wasn't. Sophia and Alex's struggles were their own, and I had no interest in getting involved. If anything, their downfall was a reminder of how far I'd come. I had walked away from the chaos, and I wasn't looking back. They could deal with the consequences of their choices, just as I had dealt with mine. As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of closure. Sophia's struggles didn't bring me joy, but they did bring me clarity. I had made the right decision. Leaving wasn't just the best thing I could have done for myself. It was the only thing. Months had passed since I walked away from Sophia, the apartment, and everything tied to that chapter of my life. I'd thought about them less and less as time went on, focusing on my own growth, my own happiness. But every now and then, through the grapevine of mutual friends or distant family, I'd catch wind of how things were unfolding on their end. And, as expected, it was a train wreck. Sophia and Alex had been evicted. The apartment I had poured months of work into, the apartment they thought they could claim and thrive in, had turned into a financial burden they couldn't carry. Between the mounting rent, the water damage they never fixed, and Alex's laughable attempts at starting yet another doomed business, they were forced to pack up and leave. Word was, they had moved in with Alex's parents, a far cry from the glamorous life Sophia had envisioned for herself. I wasn't surprised. If anything, I was relieved. Not for them, but for myself. Their downfall was proof of something I had already come to realize. I had dodged a bullet. It wasn't about revenge or satisfaction. I didn't take pleasure in their struggles. Well, maybe a small part of me did. But that wasn't the point. The real satisfaction came from knowing that I had done the right thing by walking away. Their chaos, their manipulations, their entitlement, it was all behind me now. For the first time in years, I was living my life on my own terms. My apartment, modest as it was, felt like home in a way the old one never did. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every small detail reflected me. Not a shared compromise or someone else's approval, just me. My days were quieter now, but they were also fuller. I had picked up new hobbies, reconnected with old friends, and even started planning a solo trip. Something I'd always wanted to do but never had the freedom for. My career was thriving, too. Without the constant weight of Sophia's demands and drama, I had been able to focus on my work, earning a promotion that came with not only a higher salary but also a sense of pride. One evening, as I sat on my couch sipping a glass of wine, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about the person I had been before, the man who bent over backward to please someone who never truly valued him. I thought about the nights I spent patching walls and sanding floors, convinced that I was building something meaningful, only to realize too late that I was the only one trying. But more than that, I thought about the person I had become since walking away. Stronger, happier, free. Sophia's words echoed in my mind, the ones she had used so often to guilt me into submission. Family helps family. For so long, I had let that phrase dictate my actions, sacrificing my own needs to live up to some warped idea of loyalty. But now, I saw it for what it really was, a tool she used to manipulate me. True family, I realized, doesn't use love as leverage. They don't take advantage of your kindness or punish you for setting boundaries. True family builds you up, supports your growth, and celebrates your success, not just when it benefits them, but because they care about you as a person. And that was the biggest lesson of all. Love, loyalty, and respect aren't things you owe someone just because of a title or a shared history. They're things you earn, things you nurture. And when they're one-sided, they aren't worth holding on to. I finished my wine and set the glass down, a small smile playing at my lips. The past was just that, past. I had better things to focus on now. My life, my goals, my happiness. Sophia and Alex could figure out their own path, whatever that looked like. But as for me, I was done looking back. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace.